Hi, welcome to this week's Authors Love Readers podcast, where we delve into the stories behind the stories. We're asking authors questions, some of them fun, some of them serious, and from their answers, you're going to learn things you never knew about the people who write the stories you love. My name is Patricia McLinn. I'm your host and designated question asker. Now, let's start the show. Hi. This week on Authors Love Readers podcast, you're going to be hearing only from me, Patricia McLinn. We're going to do some follow-up on another podcast I did. Also do some explaining, some translating for you from terms that authors use without really thinking about it, and maybe they aren't as familiar to you. So we'll delve into that in a bit. The first thing I wanted to do was update you on the trademark issue that I talked about in a previous episode. The author who had trademarked the word cocky in various versions withdrew her trademark on 2 of those versions. And that also ended her legal battle. She was suing 3 people. And so that has been withdrawn. Those defendants are free and clear. She kept the trademark on the specific series name that she had been using since she started publishing the series, and it is individual to her books as the character's last name. So, in my view, that is entirely reasonable and makes a lot of sense, doesn't impose on anybody else, doesn't try to keep anybody else from playing on a broad ball field. So it makes a lot of sense. This does not mean, unfortunately, that the overall issue of people trademarking terms has ended. There have been a number of people who have followed up with overreaching submissions to the United States Patent and Trademark Office. And authors are trying to follow up on these to prevent people from abusing the trademarks, in essence. And I will also say that author world publishing is not the only area where this is happening. Ad Age reported in August the 22nd that P&G, what those of us of a certain age knew as Procter & Gamble, has filed numerous applications with the USPTO, including for LOL, as in laugh out loud, WTF, not going to tell you what that means if you don't know, FML, NBD, no big deal, and some other online abbreviations. You know, it does not seem to me that that is a good thing for them to be allowed to trademark. And I would assume that other businesses are going to protest that, and we'll just have to see how it works out and whether there comes a leveling of this attempt to trademark, to land grab onto terms and phrases and trademark them when in fact they belong to the general society and should not be specified in that way, in my ever so humble opinion. Another update I wanted to give you was on the scams that are going on, specifically Kindle Unlimited, and I had a couple of posts back in June about this. Amazon has made attempts to crack down on a few individuals. A few people were told to close up their shop. However, some of those people popped right back up in other forms and were quite open and public about what they were doing and how they were doing it. Now, of those second tries, I believe, last count, at least one of them had been closed down, but others are still there. If this reminds you of anything, it's that game on the boardwalk, at the beach during the summer, whack-a-mole, where as soon as you whack one, another one comes up, or 2 come up. It's really disheartening for those of us who have been around for a really long time and who value having a career and a relationship with the readers, because these people are carpetbaggers. They're just coming in, they're trying to make the most amount of money they can. Unfortunately, the Amazon ecosystem, the ecosystem that Amazon has created with Kindle Unlimited, does foster this sort of abuse. And while Amazon has directed attention at some of these individuals, they have not really gotten down to the core of what the problem is. Equally, unfortunately, they will then make broad stroke efforts that seem to catch 98% legitimate authors and 2% of the scammers. And you can see the scammers sitting there unscathed, and then at the same time you're seeing all these legitimate authors having all sorts of difficulties. And this is not, I have not personally, to this point, knock on wood, been affected. So this is purely as an observer, especially because I'm not involved in Kindle Unlimited and will not be, because it demands exclusivity. So it just doesn't suit my temperament or my business model of trying to be as inclusive as possible with my readers. So those are the updates. Stay tuned for Author Speak. As the podcast has gone on with episodes of Authors Love Readers, I listen to the episodes, and sometimes I hear us, the other author and myself, talking about things, and I wonder, do the readers understand what we're saying? Because like most businesses, we have certain lingo that we use, and I asked for examples of that from people, and I've gotten a number of them. So and there are a few more that I added to the list after listening to these podcasts. So in no particular order, I'm going to talk about a few terms or terminology and give my definition. Some other authors might not agree. So here we go. The Authors Love Readers Translation Service.
Hello, and welcome to Authors Love Readers Translation Service.
One listener asked about what it means when we refer to whether we're a plotter or a pantser, whether an author is a plotter or a pantser. Well, a plotter, and that's T-T, P-L-O-T-T-E-R, is a person who plans ahead, often has an outline or some other way of knowing what their story is going to be. Sometimes people use color-coded note cards, or they'll have, as you've heard from various authors on here, what their system is. They'll have post-it notes that they move around. They'll have cards on a board. They'll have a whiteboard. And they'll have an outline that they write into the computer. But before they start writing, they know what the structure and the bone structure of the book is going to be. They don't know all the details, or most of them don't, that flesh out the book. They know the general points of it. And a pantser, and I am one, I am a fairly extreme pantser, just starts writing, and we work our way through the process of writing to find the story. There are also, some people also refer to this as a discovery writer, that we are finding the story as we write. Joe Beverly, wonderful historical romance writer, has referred to it as writing into the mists, where you don't know what's going to happen, or you have a vague view of a few things, and you just keep writing until you find it. There is a very strong view that pantsing is much less efficient. That outlining is the way to be more effective and to write more words per day. And for some people, that might well be true. My point as a pantser is that you have to look at the entire process. So if they're taking a month to plot the book, and for some people that's a very low figure, and then they can write the book in 3 months, how is that different from me pantsing for 4 months? And we both come to the end of the book in the same amount of time. And yet most people say, oh, the plotting's more efficient. What is most efficient, in my opinion, is whatever gets the words down. And my experience in trying to plot a couple times has been that my impatient little mind gets tired and says, well, you've told that story, let's go play with something else. So the outline gets the story out for me, and then I don't want to do the writing. Also, I find that the physical act of typing opens things up for me that I had not otherwise known were coming. I know that all sounds a little woo-woo, but that's the truth. That's how it happens. So most people tend to be toward one end of the spectrum or the other of plotter and pantsers, but it is a spectrum. And sometimes people swing back and forth. And for some projects, they will find themselves going more one way than the other way. And also, now I've been published for 28 years, and have been, was sold the year before that. So, and worked on the manuscript that sold, say, the year before that. So say 30 years, and have done 45 plus books, maybe more than that. I'd have to go back and check. But each book is a little different. And as I'm talking to friends I started out with, I'm hearing more and more people saying that their process changed and is changing. And that some people who never plotted are plotting more. Some people who used to plot are getting a little freer. It's my favorite answer to everything. It depends. But if you hear us talking about process and we refer to plotters or pantsers, that is the explanation for those terms. When I talked about plotters and pantsers, and quite a few times in the various episodes, there's been talk about structure. What we're mostly talking about, and one of the ways we address it, I know Emily Richards and I talked about a workshop that we did where we talked about writing from the inside out or the outside in. And Emily tends to start from a story, from knowing what the story is going to be in the structure. And I tend to start from hearing voices in my head, a character, and I have to work my way out to. Once I know that character, then I can figure out where they're going and what they're doing. And Emily starts from the structure and works into the heart and soul of the characters. So understand that you have to have both. You have to get there to have both the structure and that heart and soul of the characters. But which order you take to get there doesn't matter, as long as it works for you and you get there. Now, when we talk about structure, I am most often talking about what's the classic 3-act structure. And in its most basic form, it's a beginning, middle, and end. Every story should have one of each. Some more avant-garde doesn't, but there is something very powerful about that sequence and about how we react to story. Notice the 3 in there. When I teach writing, I talk about the rule of 3. It's extremely powerful. Our brains are wired to look for patterns, part of how we've survived. The smallest number that can be recognized as a pattern is 3. 1's solo, 2 is, that could be starting, but it may not. It just may be chance. But 3, when you get to 3, it's much more powerful. And you start looking around and noticing how much 3 shows up in our cultures. And it's not just Western culture, it is across the globe. But in Western culture, you think about, the good, the bad, and the ugly. You think about the 3 bears. You think about red, white, and blue, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. There are so many things that come in 3s because it resonates with us. And one of the things as a writer is to delve into that and to explore that and use it for your benefit and for the reader's enjoyment. So I want to talk about the 3 acts: beginning, middle, and end. It's pretty basic, but it's very powerful and it's very important. The other thing that I think of with structure is the character arc. Who the character is at the beginning is not who your main character, anyhow, is at the end. The forces of the story and the character has changed him or herself. And if you have 2 protagonists, then to my mind, they both need to change. A static character is boring, and they are. So I want characters who are challenged and who respond to the challenge, and in doing so, they change themselves. Now, this all sounds pretty theoretical and maybe a little out there, but it's really familiar to you. And the one story that shows it so clearly is Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol. I have to be careful because I tend to think of the Muppets version. So if I do anything, like I always think of 2 Marley ghosts, but in the original, there's only 1. Only in the Muppets is there 2. But you think about A Christmas Carol and who he is at the beginning, and then that's Act 1, establishes who he is, this miser who will not give money to the poor, who treats his clerk, Bob Cratchit, terribly, who doesn't even know about Tiny Tim, much less care about him, who dismisses his nephew who wants to celebrate with him. In fact, Scrooge is saying that he's going to have stalks of mistletoe stabbed through the heart of these people who are celebrating Christmas. He not only doesn't want to celebrate, he wants nobody else to celebrate. So that's who he is in Act 1. Now, something has to start to change him, because we're all humans and we don't change unless we're forced to. But what forces Scrooge to start to change is the appearance of Marley, the ghost of Marley. And that shakes him up. That pushes him out of his ordinary life, and that pushes him into Act 2. Then that moving from Act 1 to Act 2 is often called a turning point. Ghost of Marley appears a turning point for Scrooge. He goes into Act 2, where he is challenged by, what do you know? 3 ghosts: the past, the present, and the future. And each of those pushes him, challenges him, makes him uncomfortable in a different way. And he changes a little bit with each of them. You come to the end of Act 2 when he is at the end of dealing with the ghost of Christmas future, and he is facing the end of his life. He's facing his mortality, the gravestone that's going to have his name and dates on it. And will it say anything else? And will anyone mourn him? And the changes that he's made from who he was at the moment that Marley's ghost arrived to who he is now changes how he will react to that. And that moment then is the turning point that pushes him into Act 3. And what you have in Act 3 are echoes of things that happened in Act 1, but the new Scrooge acts in a different way because he's changed. So now he does donate to the poor. He helps Bob Cratchit and saves Tiny Tim. He enjoys his nephew's company. He is a changed man. And that is his character arc. And that's the structure, the 3-act structure. And they work together and they carry us through a wonderful story, an absolutely wonderful story. And that's what, as a writer, a lot of our stories, whether we are looking at it overtly, as I just described it, or whether we've internalized a lot of it. And as a reader, I definitely, growing up, I internalized a lot of this. I never recognized it until I started writing. But it does help stories resonate with the reader or the viewer, if you're talking about broadcast stories. It feels right. It has the right internal rhythm, and it makes it more believable. So that is what we're talking about when we talk about structure and character arc. Another term that has popped up quite a bit on the Authors Love Readers podcast is point of view, also POV, we abbreviate it. What we're talking about is which character is telling the story, or which character is the story being experienced through in that section, or possibly in the whole book. So if you have a book you're reading and it's first person, then that character, that first person character, is the POV character. You are seeing everything through that character's eyes and senses and emotions. That character cannot tell you that their best friend felt a bee sting. That character can tell you that their best friend jumped up and yelped and said, "I've been stung." But that character can only experience his or her own senses. Now, a lot of popular fiction is written through what they call third person close. So you are very deep into that character, although it's not first person. It is he and she, and it's written as third person, but you are seeing each scene through one character's point of view at a time. If there are multiple characters who are giving you your point of view, you, the reader, the point of view, that's often referred to as head hopping. I had no idea any of this existed when I started writing fiction, but it was so interesting to me as when I went back and looked at some books that I sort of liked, but I never felt like I was really connected to the characters. Invariably, the author had been head hopping. And that was a different style. And, these things change over time. Some of the classics, Dickens, it doesn't do particularly close point of view. Fielding, who wrote Tom Jones, which I enjoyed tremendously, he breaks out and the author is talking to the reader directly. So that's like, that's definitely not in the character's point of view. And I like a variety of points of view, and I like first person, and it just depends on what the story requires. I tend to think of it as a movie, and I'm thinking which character becomes the best camera to show what is happening here. A lot of thrillers or suspense books will start with a section that is in the point of view of the bad guy. You may not know that who the bad guy is, because when you are deep in somebody's point of view, they don't often say, "My name is Jeremy," as they don't say, "I have strange blue eyes," because that's not what they see or experience. They know who they are. They're not reminding themselves of their name. But look for that in some books, and you'll see what we're talking about. A lot of times, authors pay a lot of attention to the point of view because it can make a scene and a book stronger depending on which character is reporting, in essence, what is going on in that part of the story. So keep an eye out for that, but not too close an eye, because you just want to read the story. Anyhow, that is the explanation for point of view, or POV. A number of the terms that I have encountered in listening to Authors Love Readers that I don't know whether readers are familiar with or not have to do with the business side. And I'm not going to go real deep into this, because why should you care? You really shouldn't. But we use these terms, and so if you're curious, we talk about trad or traditional, hybrid, and then indie or self-published. These are ways to bring our works to you, the readers. Traditional is what we all think of until the past, 10 years, was the primary way for people to get books. That's where there's a publisher, often in New York, and sometimes New York is used synonymously by authors to refer to traditional publishing, where an author would write a query letter, submit a proposal, which is the synopsis of the whole story, and usually the first 3 chapters. And then if the query letter was liked, then they asked for the proposal. If the proposal was liked, then they asked for the complete manuscript. And this process could take years, literally years, months between each step. And you would wait and wait and wait and wait to hear. And then if the publisher bought the rights to publish the book, then it often took another year for it to actually be published. And in that business model, the publisher then pays the author a percentage, usually off the cover price, in royalties. That percentage, when I was writing for Harlequin and Silhouette, was 6% of the cover price came to me. Now, that was in the US. If that book was published overseas, it was usually a percentage, a fraction of a percentage for each book sold came to me. With big name authors selling like hardcover, it can be 10 to 15% off the cover price goes to the author. Totally depends. A lot of variation in there. And there were some publishers that paid 2% on cover price to authors. So it wasn't a great deal for the authors. Now, I do say that traditional publishing, when it works, when that model works for the big name people, it really works. It's, they are not hurting at all. They are doing very well. For mid-list authors or for people writing for a more niche audience, I'm not as big a fan, but that's my personal opinion. Let's go on with the less editorializing and more defining. Indie or self-published has risen since really 2009, 2010 was when it really got going. And it was initially called self-published. Now, what's confusing about that is before the ebooks came up, self-published was an option if you went out and paid a printer to print your books and you had the physical print books, and then you went around and tried to sell them as some authors did out of the trunk of their car, or going bookstore to bookstore trying to get them to sell the book on consignment. That was also often called vanity press. That was a very different model from what is currently sometimes called self-published. I prefer indie because self-published, first of all, is a misnomer. What I'm doing is not self. I'm not doing this alone. I need a lot of help. My assistant, I talk about Kay, does a lot of work for me. I have a formatter. I have a cover designer. I have a proofer. I have people who help with my newsletter. This is not self. If I had to do it all myself, there'd be like one book every 10 years because there's just so much involved with it. So to me, independent makes more sense as a term. So you have traditionally published, you have independently published. Hybrid are those authors who are doing some of both. They will have a deal with a traditional publisher, and then maybe they're doing another series that they're doing independently. I did that for a number of years until I went completely independent in 2015. And that brings us to another term that popped up quite a bit in the Authors Love Readers, reversion. And backlist also. When an author has had an agreement, a contract with a publisher, a traditional publisher, there is a clause in there called the reversion clause that says under what circumstances those rights to publish can revert, therefore reversion, to the author. They often have to do with a number of years, passage of time, and or number of units available or sold in a certain amount of time. When the author gets those rights back, and many of us have published them independently, those books that were originally traditionally published. So when we talk about a reverted title, or oh goody, we just got we got our rights, we got reversions on a number of books, that means that we have control of them again and can bring them out as independent publications to the readers again. I have, after a number of years, I have almost all of my rights reverted to all of my titles that I wrote with Silhouette Harlequin. And I have republished those books, many of them with changes, significant changes from how they were originally published with Silhouette/Harlequin. And getting reversion rights is celebrated among many of us. Okay, some more terminology. We talk about ebooks, also digital, and those are divided into two primary kinds. Whether the ebooks are in EPUB, which is kind of the standard for digital books, and that is used, or variations of it is used, by the vendors including Apple/iTunes, iBooks, Kobo, Google Play, Barnes & Noble. Amazon uses a proprietary format called Mobi, and that's theirs. It can only be used through their devices or their apps, where EPUB it can be used more generally. especially with some little bit of technical skill to vary them. Then print books are usually considered available in hardcover, trade, and mass market paperback. Hardcover, we kind of all understand. Trade is the bigger paperback version, usually has a little heavier cover on it than the mass market paperback. And it's, the size can vary, but it's, I don't know, 6x9, something like that, a lot of times. It's the bigger one. What can be really confusing if you hear in the business, they will also refer to trade as meaning all kind of general readership books. And I think of that as versus like textbooks or, specific use books. So trade in that term is not talking about the format. It's talking about basically the customers who are and how are they selling them. Mass market paperback books are actually really an interesting history if you ever need to do a study on business, because they revolutionized book selling in, I would say, the 60s. I'd have to really check, but say the 60s. I might be a little late on that. And they were much less expensive. They were more affordable, more transportable, easier to hold in your hand, and it became for sale at grocery stores and drugstores and airports rather than just a single-use bookstore. It's really interesting what that did to the publishing industry and how it opened up a lot of possibilities. The digital books have really hurt the business of the mass market paperbacks because it's easier. I talked about it being lighter weight, smaller, easier to transport, less expensive. Well, digital books tend to beat the mass market paperback on each of those categories. The benefit that mass market paperbacks has is what we all enjoy, the feel of a book in our hands. But I will say my luggage really appreciates ebooks because I've had some suitcases that could not survive my transporting of books from vacations. The other thing that has happened in books, and one of the terms that we use is print on demand, or POD. And I think this is fabulous because the book industry traditionally has published so many more books than were ever going to be bought. And they expected that a 50% sell-through, selling 50% of the books that they published, was spectacular, which meant that 50% of those paper products went into the garbage, or you hope they got recycled, but they didn't always. Print on demand, and a lot of people are using that, means that when the book is ordered, it is printed at that point. They've made machinery and not only functions, but business practices that allow that to happen. So it's delivered when you want that book. And I think that's a terrific advance. And they're talking about machines that can do that for you on the spot in bookstores. They've been talking about this for a while, but I keep hoping that they will get from talk to more doing it, and make it more widespread and possible, because that would be lovely to be able to order that book and have it right there. So those are a couple of more business terms, and I have some more in a moment. There are a number of terms that we authors use and that all kind of connect and mesh with each other. And they have to do with you finding the books, which is usually called discoverability. When I entered the business so many years ago, I can remember going to my first Romance Writers of Washington, D.C., the Washington Romance Writers meeting, and a lovely author, Nancy Richards Akers, who asked me what I was writing. And I sort of looked back at her and said, a book, because I had no idea what she was talking about. What she was asking me was genre. And there are all sorts of genres, but you think about when you would walk into a bookstore, or do walk into a bookstore, or the library now, and you would see these big categories. It would say romance, it would say mystery, it would say science fiction, fantasy, it might say literary or westerns. And so they were very broad categories. And that is what is referred to as genre. Sometimes people will also say it has to do with the distinction between fiction and nonfiction, has to do with the distinction within fiction between popular fiction or literary fiction. I think each of the categories is a genre. In digital books, the way we try to help the reader find our books is through covers. For one thing, that's the visual clue of what genre that book will be. Also, what they refer to as metadata, metadata, one word. And we put in keywords and categories into that. And each of the vendors has a different way of doing it, let me tell you. There is no uniformity, and it can drive you crazy. And then they change it all the time. So we're always dealing with these keywords and what we can do and how many we can do it, and whether we have to stand on our left foot or put up our right hand, turn around 3 times, and wink. I'm getting bitter. Sorry about that. So the metadata is supposed to help you when you're searching. Well, we all know it's not a perfect system by any means. And the problem I have with that is that the metadata is clunky. We have terms in there like mysteries with dogs. Well, you can have a mystery with a dog where the dog talks. You can have a mystery with a dog where it makes you cry. You can have a mystery with a dog where it's fun. You can have a mystery with a dog where it makes you cry and laugh. You can have a mystery with a dog that was set in 1832. It doesn't tell you very specifically, and especially it doesn't get to the kind of reading experience that it is. Now, I'll tell you a secret. I'm holding out great hope that artificial intelligence and quantum computing will get together and figure out how to make discoverability really useful, and while keeping our privacy. I haven't quite figured out how they're going to do this, but keeping our privacy, we can also somehow key into what emotional reaction we had to a book, how it made us feel, and what kind of reading experience it was. And then we can look for more books that do that. Or we can say, okay, I'm not in the mood for that. Today I just had this emotional experience. I want a different kind of emotional experience. And you go look for the book that way. Now, I cannot tell you that anybody is working on this at the moment. It is my, I don't want to say pipe dream. It's my hope and expectation. How's that? That it will happen. Maybe even in my lifetime, if only people would listen to me. So, one other element and a term that we use that has to do with discoverability is blurb. Isn't that a great sounding word? BLURB, blurb. This is, it was used initially to talk about what was on the back of the cover, also called back cover copy. And some people use it interchangeably with book description. So it's a shorter version of what's in the book that's hopefully will give you some of that feel of what the emotional reaction will be, what the reading experience will be. And it is an important tool in discoverability for you, the reader. And most of us authors hate them. At least this author hates it. I always think, if I could have written the book in 250 to 300 words or characters, I would not have written a 90,000 word book. But nobody listens to me. So they are out there. Blurbs, book descriptions, and they help with the metadata. One other term I wanted that I know you've heard me use is Novelist Inc. Novelist Inc. is an organization of multi-published popular fiction authors. And so you have to have sold multiple books to be a member of it. And I am a past president. Yeah, I think it's a great group if you're an established author. The fact that we are multi-genre has been very useful in learning from each other and sharing experiences and information. And I will end the advertisement for it right then. Other organizations, RWA is the Romance Writers of America, ITW, International Thriller Writers. There's also the Sisters in Crime. Those have been talked about quite a bit on the podcast. I hope you've enjoyed this edition of Authors Love Readers podcast, this special edition with author speak. If you have terms that you've heard us use that have confused you or left you in the dark, please drop us a line at podcast@authorslovereaders.com, and we'll try to put together another one of these episodes to help you translate author speak for the future. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next week. That's the show for this week. Hope you enjoyed it, and thank you for joining Authors Love Readers podcast. Remember, you can always find out more about our guest authors in the show notes, and you can find out more about me at www.patriciamclinn.com. You can also send in questions to be asked of future authors at podcast@authorslovereaders.com. Until next week, wishing you lots of happy reading. Bye.